Welcome to this episode of Safe Home Podcast for struggling teens and their families finding their healing path. I'm Beth Syverson, a mom of an 18-year-old son, Joey, who's been dealing with substance use, disorder, and mental health issues for several years. I am walking beside him as he struggles with his recovery, while I work on my own personal growth and healing. In this episode, we'll be diving into the topic of EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement, Desensitization, and Reprocessing. It's a psychotherapy modality that helps people heal from trauma, and it has really great outcome. In some studies, it says that 84 to 90% of single trauma victims no longer have post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD after only 3 90-minute sessions. That's amazing. So it's got really, really good track record, especially for healing trauma. Also, it helps with depression and addiction and other things. Any of those kind of unconscious, long, chronic emotional problems that people have, EMDR is really good for. And what you do in an EMDR session is the therapist will either take their fingers and wave them back and forth in front of your eyes, and you're supposed to follow them with your eyeballs. Or they hand you 2 little buzzers in your hands, and the buzzers vibrate one hand and then the other, then the other, then the other. So either way, if you're using your eyes or your hands, what's happening is your brain is crossing from the right brain to the left brain over and over, and it kind of breaks down the barrier and allows the person to be able to access their memories and their feelings that they've stuffed down for years and years and years. Our guest is Emma Stevens, whose book, The Gathering Place, An Adoptee's Story, takes us through her healing journey with EMDR. This memoir is Emma's first book, and she and I share the same goal of helping adoptees find their voice and reclaim their identities. If you've listened to previous episodes, you might remember that we adopted our son Joey when he was an infant. He and I both believe his relinquishment trauma is at the root of his existential struggle, and I am committed to giving voice to adoptees. But even if you have no connection at all to adoption, this episode will be enlightening because EMDR is a healing modality that is proven to be effective with conditions such as PTSD, anxiety, eating disorders, and addiction. So thank you very much for being here to enlighten us all. Emma, welcome to Safe Home.
Hi, Beth. I'm so happy to be here.
Great, great. I have been curious about EMDR for a long time, and after reading your memoir, I'm even more interested in getting it for myself and finding a practitioner for Joey eventually when he's in a place where he'd be able to do that. So we'll definitely talk about EMDR, but before we do, I'd like to just give everyone a background about your being adopted. And can you tell us your adoption story?
Well, sure. Thanks for asking. I would say that I was told from as long ago as I can remember, and I was born in the 60s, so it was the baby scoop era. And I can remember when I was told by my mother that I cried, that was the first thing I did, was feeling so sad of, I'll bet my birth mother just wonders how I am, where I am. And I had this real concern for how she was doing. But that did not sit well with my adoptive parents. And from that point forward, it was, we've told you this information, but now we want you to forget it. And we don't want you to ever bring it up again.
Oof, ouch.
Right. So I grew up with this kind of, there's a Portuguese word called saudade, and it translates to meaning a longing that you can't explain. I guess the closest word we have in English is melancholy or bittersweet.
Mm-hmm.
And I just grew up with that and not really being able to have any language to what it meant or how I was feeling, and had no idea it was connected to my adoption and my primal wound of being separated from my lineage and basically being asked to be someone that I wasn't. And it wasn't okay to be me.
That must be so painful.
It is. And when you feel like you're being told that you're the one that doesn't understand reality, then you question yourself all your life of, well, I guess they're right. Because, you know, our parents are kind of like our gods in a way, because we look to them for our caregiving and, you know, eating and shelter and all of that. So I had to think that, well, I guess I just better, you know, get over this.
Yeah, stuff it down because it's not going to be fixed or looked at by this family situation, right?
Right. Yeah, I actually had a lot of shame about it,
Ah,
meaning that I was, apologetic that I was adopted,
mm,
apologetic that I wasn't the biological child that they wanted, apologetic for taking up too much space.
mm.
And then it was even sadder when I became a teenager and I basically became the other woman in the house to my mother.
Yeah,
And that was harsh. That was really hard to understand at that age of what that meant and the jealousy. I didn't know where that came from. And I was going through my own hormonal thing of, changing with
sure.
puberty. And anyway,
Yeah.
we had our rough times.
That part of your book was really heartbreaking. So there was a lot of alcohol in your house growing up.
Yes, a lot. I was
Wow.
very accepted and almost expected.
That was the time you had a cocktail as soon as you got home from work, or heck, the moms would have cocktails at lunch while their husbands were at work.
Yeah.
It was very
I
normal.
could watch their behavior change and I would see it in their eyes when I
Oh,
realized that, okay, that extra drink, that just pushed them over the edge.
dang it.
And then when they'd fight between themselves, they then would turn it on my brother and myself. And we didn't maybe even do anything wrong.
Yeah.
But they were distorted with their thinking and their alcohol. And that could be hours of sitting there listening to rants and raves.
That was just gut-wrenching in your book. And your brother is also adopted.
Yes, he was. He's deceased now.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, really just a tragic childhood you had. It's just, you just think, okay, that was really rough. And then you turn the page and go, oh my God, there's
There were
more.
multiple journeys, just like I
Oh,
promised,
man.
right?
Yes. I'm so sorry you went through all that. And then you eventually got into alcohol yourself, because why wouldn't you? It was just
Right.
part of growing up and part of our culture, fraternity parties and college.
Mhm.
Everybody just drank all weekend, right?
Right. I didn't even question it of whether I should or shouldn't. It was just what we did.
That's what you did. And do you think you were particularly susceptible to alcohol based on your upbringing and just...
Well, I had a double whammy because I did find out that when I met my birth mother, she was in an alcohol rehabilitation center.
So you had it
And
genetically.
And the adoptive family was, and then my brother, he died from his addictions.
Oh man, so terrible. And unfortunately, still today, drinking is still so much a part of the culture. I mean, you can't hardly turn on a TV show or a movie or anything without alcohol being part of it. It's just...
That's so true.
Oh man, it must be so hard living in recovery from that and just seeing that everywhere.
No, actually, I just am thrilled that I don't have to drink anymore.
You're like, phew.
I'm a very happy person that I'm out of that kind of bondage.
Oh, good for you. I used to be addicted to sugar, which is also everywhere. And people sometimes ask me if I get tempted. I'm like, no way. That stuff is poison. That's terrible for me. It's not poison for everyone, but for me, it was terrible. So I see a big pile of sugar in whatever form, and I'm like, ugh. So
yeah, same here.
That's good. That's good. So what kinds of things did you, besides alcohol, how did you self-medicate or try to feel better before you found EMDR?
Well, I think I was just searching all my life for something, and sometimes there'd be good things. I poured myself into singing and being in a choir.
Yay.
And got a lot of self-esteem from that. It was really a life preserver. And then I was a good springboard diver.
Nice.
And the things that I seem to do, I do repetitively. And that would apply to singing and diving, but it also applied to when I do things that I didn't understand at that point were self-harm. But I did them repetitively. And that would be alcohol, and it would be hanging out with the wrong people. It would be making bad choices. And I think one of my things was, and I think it's pretty common for adoptees, is we live in a fantasy world. First of all, we're imagining who is our biological family. Mine was that I always wanted it to be Samantha from Bewitched.
I loved her too.
And the way she treated Tabitha was so sweet. And I just thought, wow, what a great mom. So there was that fantasy. And then just always chasing. I got into advertising, which is a world of fakeness.
Yeah.
And until I learned that hard lesson of why I didn't belong there, I was chasing always after things that weren't real. And I had to learn a lot of lessons. And I think probably when I had my children, I started thinking I need to do better for them. But I had a lot of road left even after them until I got to EMDR.
Okay, so how old were you, or how old were your kids? Where were you in life when you found EMDR?
Well, in the book, if you remember, where I was exploited by a therapist.
That was horrible. I couldn't. Yeah. I'm like, give me their name and number. I'm going to go get. Oh, that was so terrible.
It was hard. We did take her through a civil case, but she's still practicing present day.
No way.
It wasn't enough. $350 an hour.
Oh, that's just horrible. It's horrible when someone in a position like that exploits someone. And I was ready to dismantle my whole adoption experience, and I was ready to give it to her, and it blew up in my face. So, well, I'm kind of glad
she knew the situation and took advantage of it, basically. But after that, in order to recover, was EMDR at its very beginning. And I went to a therapist, very kind woman, and she was saying, "This is new. I'm going to practice it on you."
Oh, okay.
And it was still when we did just the fingers going back and forth of kind of stimulating your eyes to stimulate your brain.
Right.
I can't say that it really did a lot of good.
Okay.
But fast forward just 6 years ago.
Okay.
Or no, not even that long ago, 2 years ago, right before I started writing the book. That's how I wrote the book, was EMDR.
Okay.
And found a very skilled counselor that is very empathetic, and her first thing to me was try to think of a very peaceful place where you feel welcome and all of your parts are welcome. And from there, the book started writing itself. And when we did EMDR, and I was skeptical and thinking nothing's going to drop in my brain. But sure enough, there'd be like an idea or a word or a color. And with her guidance and saying, where do you feel it in your body? We really made a lot of headway. And I wrote that book, and it really felt good.
Oh, the book is amazing. You call it The Gathering Place, which is where all of your parts gather. And I love that you put everyone on a swing, because I used to love to swing.
Yeah, we all did, right? And you pick your feet up and you feel you're flying.
Yes, oh, it's so beautiful. And so in the book, you just invite these different parts, different ages of yourself, and they come and kind of work stuff out with you. You say, I'm here. It's all right now. I've got you. And they all have different personalities. And I just realized one of them is named Tabitha. I wonder if that came from that TV show.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbolism in the book.
And so when you had the actual EMDR sessions, did this dialogue happen, or the dialogue just happened when you wrote the book?
Yes, the dialogue happened when I wrote the book. But there is one complete session that's in the book where I'm talking about present day, something that has occurred. And my therapist said, you might want to put this in your book because it's very applicable. And I did. Good. It's in the book. I start to really reconcile things of how just because you sometimes think, oh, well, yeah, I feel bad about that, but that's not related to anything. Having a second thought about that, because everything's related.
Everything's related.
Everything's connected. Everything's related. And I hope I put it in the book where I describe how I put a lot of things together just based on some silly thing that happened in my everyday life.
Wow. Yeah, people think, oh, that doesn't matter. That wasn't influential, but everything matters. Everything builds on itself, right? You're like a spider web from when you're a baby or in utero.
And those are our implicit memories that are driving us. Yes. And it's stored in our bodies. And whether we know it or not, we're making decisions and showing up to places and based on things we haven't even clued into, are unconscious.
Yes. And that's Bessel van der Kolk's book.
Yeah.
The Body Keeps the Score is so good about that. And it just lays it out in language everyone can understand. And it makes you really it makes me very concerned about anyone who has very young children. I look at babies and go, oh, sheesh, be careful.
Yeah.
You know,
Huge responsibility forming that little mind and being.
Yeah, those early days are so important.
Yeah.
And it makes me really sad when I can see the children going through stuff like right now, Ukraine is trying to fight off Russia. And you just think of those little families and these children, especially the children that have no idea how to register any of it. How is that going to impact their whole life? Everything.
Yes.
So adoption impacts lives for sure, no matter what.
For sure.
It doesn't impact everyone the same, but I don't believe that you can be relinquished, even if it's for the very best reasons, even if it's to the most perfect adoptive family, without having this primal wound, what they call the primal wound.
I totally agree.
Yeah. And I am here as an adoptive parent who some adoptive parents don't really buy into this whole thing, but I do. And I have a nice giant load of guilt of participating in this adoption cycle, but knowing that my son would have been adopted by someone else anyway. But I'm wanting to make adoptees' voices heard, adult adoptees that have worked through their shit, that have really, really done the work to help us realize that adoption is no small little thing that you can just go, oh, good, they got a different family that can better take care of them. No. That's
right.
It's way, way, way more than that.
And just because an adoptee says, oh, I'm fine with it. That was my brother.
Yeah.
He's like, adoption doesn't bother me. I don't want to know them. Or why would I want to know them if they didn't want to know me?
Oh, yeah.
Because I actually had his information from him.
Yes.
And I asked him, would you like it? And he said no.
Oh, wow.
But I can look now at his life and see how much it colored his life until his death.
Yeah.
And I would even go as far as saying it's death by adoption, because all his choices he made throughout his life were because of he not dealing with his primal wound or even acknowledging that he had it.
Yeah, the acknowledging it in the first place is just really, really hard. And a lot of adoptees, what is it? You have a 40, I can't remember.
4 times more likely than a non-adopted person to commit suicide, or at least try to commit suicide.
That's horrible.
We're overrepresented in mental health and alcohol and jails and treatment centers.
And by an exponential amount, not just some little amount. It's exponential. And, no one told me that when I adopted Joey. They're like, here you go. I'm like, okay. So, man, if we can just help get the word out, that's why I'm so thrilled to get adoptees' voices on the podcast. And so people can understand and start getting their minds wrapped around this thing. And so we can try to find better solutions.
Yeah, it's just more open communication. And let's stop being so threatened and fear-based. That adopted child is just going to love you more when you say, I hear you, I see you. And we're going to figure this out together.
Yes.
I mean, I can't even imagine. It's almost bringing tears to my eyes thinking if I had had someone or my parents say that to me, it would have made a world of difference.
I hope it helps Joey that I am totally on his side and totally empathetic as much as I can be, not being an adopted person, but I am trying really hard to help him find resources and find ways to deal with it. I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, he realizes deeply how his adoption has affected him.
So he's ahead of the game.
I guess so, but it makes him really sad. And, he's like, I totally know why I am self-destructing right here. So I hope that eventually he will be able to get to the place where he'll be on the other side of it, as far as the self-destructive behavior piece of it.
Right. Yeah.
So, oh my gosh. Well, can you tell us what EMDR looks like in practice now? I mean, it is, like you said, very new as far as therapeutic practices go. When did it start? Like the 90s?
That's when I first tried it, was in the 90s. Yeah. And so here we are, 2021 is when I first tried it.
Okay.
And a lot of people have different ways, but my counselor has the handheld pulsers where you hold one in your right hand, one in your left. and it alternates just kind of vibrating, and she can turn up the volume or she can turn down the volume, and she can actually increase the pace or decrease it.
Okay.
So you let them know what you feel comfortable with. And then you just try to empty. It's almost like meditating, really.
Yeah.
Try to empty your brain and trust that your brain is going to take you to where you need to go. Even if you come up with some word, green, and you say, oh, I don't know why green came in my head. Well, my counselor would take that and say, that's significant. That meant something. And then she'd give me prompts of where you feel it in your body, or what shade of green do you see? What is it about the color? And it just progresses to where it really takes you somewhere.
Was there really something green that you came up with?
No, I just came up with that.
Oh, okay. But whatever seemingly innocuous word.
But often I just have a word.
Yeah.
Like deprivation is a big one for me.
Wow.
Yeah. And that is definitely my original wound, my primal wound. And I see how it's played out throughout my life in just the smallest of situations. And so, at least I do know where it's coming from. And I can go, yeah, there it is. It's happening.
Yeah.
And I think I can deconstruct it faster now instead of being overwhelmed by it. And letting it last for too long, or me moving into a self-sabotaging behavior instead of, let's sit with this. Let's take this apart and, is this true? If I'm distorted, is this a true story I'm telling myself? Is this happening presently? And it really helps, I think.
Because it's much easier to say, oh, that's nothing. I'm good. Let's just move on. It's easier to just...
That's silly. I'm having a silly thought.
Yeah.
Or I worried that I might not have any thought at all.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, nope, that's going to mean something too.
Oh.
And so that freed me up.
Oh, good.
I didn't feel pressure of coming up with some huge idea. It was just, it could be very simple.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you have to have a really good therapist that is well trained in this.
Yeah, and that would be true across the board. Any kind of modality that you use, make sure that they're of good standing.
Yeah.
Check the Board of Ethics.
The Board of Ethics. Is there some sort of EMDR list of practitioners?
I think so. I'm sure there is.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I really am interested in EMDR, and I asked our healthcare provider. We're with Kaiser Permanente, if you have that in your area. And my psychiatrist's office had never heard of it, which was very deflating.
Because it's pretty popular.
I think I am going to go back after reading your book and talking with you about this. I feel like this would be good for me because I have trauma from being neglected as a child, and we had foster children with substance use issues in our house when I was a kid, and there's plenty of stuff to work on.
Oh, yeah. And it affects your behavior present day.
Definitely. All the choices you make.
Like it just happens to us all.
And the EMDR, it was originally called eye movement desensitization, but now they use things in your hands, or sometimes don't they use aural, like binaural, is that what you call it? Where it goes between your ears?
I've never tried that.
I don't know if it's used in EMDR, but I know that's another modality.
Yeah. It's really to get your right brain connected to your left.
To cross it over.
And implicit memories connected with present day memories so you can integrate. Yeah. Is what it's all about, is integrating the experience that didn't have words before, but now you're giving it presence.
That makes sense. So it's kind of like shaking it up. Like, hello,
it is.
Let's get you all mixed together.
Yeah, digging down deep in there. I mean, I guess you could call it, in a certain respect, inner child work, because you are going back to those early, sometimes limbic memories. Right now I'm working on in utero.
Yeah. Oof.
And that's exciting.
And I bet, you mentioned in your book, I bet every adopted person has in utero trauma, because I bet 99.9% of people who are pregnant know that they're going to relinquish or are thinking about it, right? So you don't give birth and then think, maybe I'll relinquish this child. It's while you're being cooked in there, the birth mother is thinking about this.
Pumped into you.
Totally. Cortisol
that
and all
stress
that.
hormone is, it affects our development.
Yeah. And not only adopted people, but anyone with a parent that's struggling while they're pregnant, there can be any number of things, even just medical issues. If you have gestational diabetes or something and is extremely stressful while you're pregnant, it's nothing that you caused or tried to cause trauma to your child, but you can just imagine that any sort of trauma to the birth mother will get into the child.
Yeah.
And they won't know
true.
to deal with it until they're old enough to and have the resources and the wherewithal. Now, I don't think it would be good to do EMDR if you're right in the middle of crisis, right? It's more of when you're ready to actually deal with this stuff.
I don't know. Let me think about that's a good question.
Because I've thought about this.
Because I wouldn't rule it out.
Really?
If there was a crisis, I think it might be able to help you slow down, take a pause instead of being reactive. I think maybe it could help, really. If you had a good, practitioner that could help you get into that mode.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it could be helpful. Yeah.
Well, I think it's such a useful tool. And, pain-free, maybe emotionally not pain-free, but physically pain-free. There's no medication involved. It's just using your own mind. It's a lot like hypnosis, which we talked about earlier in the pod.
Yeah, because I usually have my eyes closed. And the sense that my counselor's in the room, she's there, but yet I've kind of shut it all out. And so I think it is a certain sense of being hypnotized.
Yeah. You just are alone with your own brain, getting deeper into your brain than what we typically, we're just kind of on the surface of our brain day to day.
Yeah. And it gives me the freedom instead of feeling like I have to come up with a great answer or I have to come up, like I'm being tested or graded on how to do it. It helps me just flow with it. Sometimes I'll even do that when I'm talking to someone and I'll look away because it just helps me disconnect and not feel like I'm performing for someone, but I get in my thought and it just helps me process whatever I'm trying to express.
That's awesome. So I would love to look into this for Joey because I think it would really help. And for myself as well. And I always talk on this podcast about how important it is that the parents of struggling kids work on themselves.
Yes.
And help your kid, of course. But the more we can work on our own stuff, this kind of stuff that's just been there forever that we don't even realize we're just swimming in it. The more we can work on that stuff, the more healthy we'll be and more able to help our kids who are also struggling.
And I would have to say that I had to learn my lessons so I didn't recreate a problem with my own kids because I was hanging on way too tight.
Oh, okay.
And luckily, I don't think I went too long or too far with it, but I see what I was doing. It was like, here's the first biological people I've ever known, and I'm going to make sure that they stay with me always.
Right.
But they needed to grow up and individuate and go off and fly and be successful.
Yeah.
And luckily, I was able to go, what are you doing? What are you doing? But that's why I feel like everyone could use therapy.
Any kind of therapy.
I don't care who you are. Even a therapist needs a therapist.
Just get it. It needs to become just as ubiquitous as alcohol. Let's make therapy.
Just make it mandatory.
Just make it everywhere. Make it just part of what everybody does.
Yeah, especially if you're going to adopt a child and want that grafting of another person onto a new tree.
Yes.
If you want it to thrive, you need to have a lot of information to make sure you have the nutrients to make that happen.
Yes. One thing that I've recently realized for adoptive parents, many of us go into adoption after dealing with infertility. I say dealing with, we have not dealt with it. I have not. I'm working on it now, but we jump into adoption before really grieving infertility, which is a pretty major biological loss, right? So
it is.
If we can work on our own stuff to avoid traumatizing our kids unintentionally and
or placing that responsibility on them.
Oh, yes. Having the child fix you, right?
Yeah. And that's kind of my situation of what it was is, I was to become the biological child that they couldn't have.
To replace the child that they couldn't have. Yeah, you and your brother.
That's an impossible task.
Yeah, that's a lot to ask.
But I didn't know it wasn't my thing to hold. So I always tried to be apologetic and try to be better and try to be that.
You were such a good girl. Yeah.
Yeah, try to be a good adopted girl.
Yes. Joey was like that too until he got into substances. When he got into substances, the good adoptee kind of went away. But his whole childhood, he never gave us trouble. He was always sweet. He was delightful, and I can't imagine how hard that must have been for him to just keep that up all the time. It must be exhausting.
Yeah. And unknowingly, I'm sure that was unconscious to him.
I'm sure. But I'm sure that just takes so much energy to keep that mask on and not upset anyone. Oh, I don't want to upset anyone.
Right. It's the true self versus the false self. Yeah. And anytime we're in false self, we are very disappointed and uncomfortable and not happy.
Yes. Oh.
But it's when we're in our true self that we feel like everything's flowing correctly and we're in tune and alignment with the world and our universe and our people that we love. Mm-hmm. It's really important. I try to remember that lesson that I learned.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to slip in there and start people pleasing and be a perfectionist and all this and that.
Oh,
and
yes.
It's that taking the pause of, what am I doing? Okay, I see this and let's analyze this. And
yes, the mindfulness of just being aware. Oh, there I go again. Yeah. If you can catch yourself doing that thing again, that is a huge advancement.
And not to beat yourself up over it, right?
Right.
Like, okay, dum-dum, you're doing it again. No, going, with lovingness of, I see it.
Yes. Oh, hello. Oh, bless your heart.
Exactly.
Oh, of course you're doing that.
And only then can you move forward.
Yes.
And not create, more harm to yourself.
Yes. Yeah, so it sounds like you've done a lot of work. EMDR has been a big part of it. I'm sure you've done other things. You had a whole bunch of quotes in your book by people I recognize, Gabor Mate and Sylvain Colgan, Ram Dass, and so many wonderful, wise people that are out there. And everyone can find their own people, whatever is on your healing path. I believe everybody can find growth and make their own lives better and their kids' lives better and the world better. Da, 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 da.
Well, I feel like as long as we keep trying to do that, that's where your joy comes from.
Yes.
Not that it's always going to work and you're always going to hit the mark, but as long as you're in that process, that's what matters.
In process. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I totally agree with you. Just in process. And if this podcast, it can just push everybody just a tiny bit more toward that in progress of personal growth, that will make a huge difference, I think. So
I agree.
Well, you have been so delightful getting to know you, Emma, and I found you through Rebecca's film, Reckoning with the Primal Wound. She was our guest on episode 30.
Wonderful film.
I just watched it again and I saw you in it. You're in the film.
Yes.
At the very beginning, you have a little cameo. I don't know what you call it. She involved a lot of adoptee voices and you were one of them.
She did, but I was the first adoptee and in the film. Yeah. So you can't miss it.
Yeah. So check out the film and definitely read Emma's book, The Gathering Place, An Adoptee's Story. Did I do that right?
Yes, you did.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Well, it's a wonderful memoir. I got to go finish the last little piece of it right now. And then I'm going to call my psychiatrist and say, hey, find me an EMDR practitioner. I might have to just go out and, find it myself and pay for it. But it sounds like it would be really, really worth it.
I think so. Well, Beth, thank you so much. It's been a delight and an honor to be on your show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode. Please share it with anyone you know who's dealt with trauma or addiction or adoption or any therapist you know or anyone that you know that might be able to benefit from the information in this episode. And find Safe Home Podcast on all the social media sites. You can also listen to our podcast on YouTube. A lot of people find it easier to deal with YouTube than podcast apps. And we are also on Patreon if you would like to support the pod. As you notice, we don't have commercials on the podcast. This is a self-supporting enterprise. So if you would like to contribute just a little bit, patreon.com makes it easy to contribute a little bit each month. And you can find us there on patreon.com/safehome. Lastly, keep up with all the Safe Home happenings by signing up for our email newsletter. The link to the newsletter sign up is in the show notes. So thank you again for listening. And Emma and I want you to stay safe.